Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 2. I hope you've all had a good weekend, as good as you possibly can in this time of the corona pandemic. And I hope that you have continued to stay healthy and that your families are healthy. I have been thinking about you, and I look forward to talking with some of you on Thursday. I had a great time Zooming with a bunch of you guys last Thursday. It was really a great conversation. So, this week we're going to be talking about addiction. The questions for your discussion groups on Tuesday will be listed in the forum tonight. After I finish this video and post this video, I will be posting the discussion questions for this week for your journaling and for your Zoom discussions on Tuesday in the forum. So, I'll let you know about that. So this week you guys are reading, and I hope have already been reading, Gabor Maté's In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. It is one of the very best books out there on addiction and the culture of addiction and the nature of addiction and where it comes from and why it matters that we talk about it and what we should do about it. So the very first thing I want you to ask you, and the very first thing I want you to do this week in your groups is to ask yourselves and ask each other, okay, what comes to mind when you hear the word addiction? And I don't want you to censor it. I don't want you to be all involved. I don't want you to be critical. Just no editing. Just what comes to mind? What do you see in your mind? Addiction. What are some associations that come to your mind? When you hear the word addict, what comes to mind? Same thing. Just raw response. What comes to mind? Do you find that you have opinions or thoughts that come to mind? Do you find that you have judgments or assumptions that come to mind? If you do, just be honest about them, because we can't examine anything unless we look at it straight in the eye. So, once you've done some writing on that, and you've thought about that, then I want you to think about Gabor Maté's definition of addiction. And I'm going to read it to you. You'll have read this already if you did the reading. But of course, this whole book is a really long explanation. But it's not super long. But here is his definition. This is on page 136. And at the very bottom of the page, Gabor Maté writes, addiction is any repeated behavior, substance-related or not, in which a person feels compelled to persist, regardless of its negative impact on his life and the lives of others. Addiction involves the 4 things. 1. Compulsive engagement with the behavior, a preoccupation with it. Impaired control over the behavior. Persistence or relapse despite evidence of harm, and dissatisfaction, irritability, or intense craving when the object, be it a drug, activity, or other goal, is not immediately available. Now, that's Gabor Maté's definition of addiction. And in the rest of the reading that you will do, you're going to learn about the nature of the human brain, why in fact our brains are hardwired for addiction to be vulnerable to addictive patterning. You're going to learn about the nature of the brain while it is addicted, and the circuitry, the neurology, the neurobiology, and the psychology of addiction. And you're also going to learn about where addiction comes from. Why are some of us more susceptible to addiction than others? How can you make yourself less vulnerable to addiction than you might otherwise be? Where does it come from? And what can we do other than pursue the addiction to soothe what the addiction is attempting to soothe? Tara Brach, in her podcast that I posted to you guys on ReggieNet, a 2-part series in her podcast, Tara Brach podcast. That's also listed in the announcements and the assignments. She has a 2-part series on addiction, and they are fantastic. And in her series, she also describes in just brilliantly and in detail, but it's succinct and economical, that addiction begins, as Gabor Maté says, as a solution to a problem. The problem is pain. The pain is trauma of some kind. Now, you might think that trauma is this rarefied experience that only those of us who've been abused or abandoned or betrayed in some way, or accosted or attacked might feel. But trauma is ubiquitous to the human experience. To be human is to at some point experience trauma of some kind. And this does not mean that we're doomed. This does not mean that we're all doomed to be addicts, obviously. But what it does mean is that we can humanize ourselves when we look at other people who are addicted, when we can look at the addict. Because as Tara Brach helps us understand, addiction, as does Gabor Maté, addiction begins as a really great solution. And by really great, all I mean is it works. It really works, right? It works. That first drink when you're 15 years old and your life is a torment at home, if you have a home or you're in poverty or you're bullied, that first drink and then that second drink, oh my gosh, the relief, it's like a magic potion. And so you do it again because it works, and you do it again because it works. And sooner than later, you can't live without it. And when you don't have it, you're irritable, you're dysfunctional, you can't function. And moreover, the neurology of the brain, as you'll learn, you need more and more of the same thing, whether it's an activity like sex or drama in relationships or shopping or, compulsive exercise or substance abuse. You need more and more and more of the same hit in order to get the same relief. And this is how addiction scales and escalates over time. Right? So Tara Brach helps us understand that addiction, or the way she puts it, is addiction is a substitute, right? The thing that we're addicted to isn't really what we're addicted to. I mean, we are. When we are physiologically and neurologically addicted to a substance or a behavior, we are addicted to that thing. But that thing has become over time a substitute for what we really wanted. So take the 15-year-old who has his or her first drink because she's being bullied at school really terribly and feels like she doesn't belong, or her parents don't understand her, and maybe they're getting divorced or they're abusive or there's something really intolerable at home, and she feels like she doesn't belong anywhere. She feels like she's just lost. She doesn't feel like she has a home in any meaningful sense. She doesn't feel seen or heard or loved. What she's really looking for is belonging. What he's really looking for is acceptance. What they're both really looking for is feeling good enough. That is what the addiction substitutes for. So when we can learn that behind the addiction is a craving, a yearning, a usually unnamed and unknown, unconscious need for a primal experience, belonging, love, affection, attunement, being understood, belonging, being safe. When we understand that behind just about every addiction is an unmet primal need, we can really rewire the way we think about addiction, the way we think about others who are addicted, and ultimately how we deal with addiction on a large scale culturally and socially. And this brings me to why I'm even teaching you about this stuff in a course called Narratives of Potential. Why in the world would I be talking about addiction, like the opposite of what it means to live a life of full potential? Well, because the number one thing that gets in the way of living a life of full potential, fully realized human potential, is the inability to tolerate the really uncomfortable feelings that inevitably accompany growth. Let me say that again. The number one thing that gets in the way, that stops us, that trips us up on the way to full potential, that is to say, engaging ourselves, our lives fully, our gifts, our capacities, all that. The number one thing is an inability to tolerate, to consciously experience the uncomfortable feelings that inevitably accompany growth. Feelings like fear, feelings like rejection, feelings like failure, feelings like not belonging, feelings like we're not good enough, right? all of those feelings get stirred up when we decide to move beyond our comfort zones, which is what's required to grow on purpose. And to grow on purpose is what's required to engage your full potential. You can live your life on accident. You can live your life by default. You can live your life by habit, or you can live your life on purpose with intention. And that, as we've learned from Aristotle, as we've learned, through the satire of the Hunger Games, Katniss certainly lived her life on purpose. Gale lived his life on purpose. Even Peeta lived his life on purpose, right? Within the constraints that they were living in. And Harari talked very much about the need to be self-aware. At the end of the book, that was the solution, right? That, in terms of moving forward and closing that gap between scarcity mindset that we've been hardwired for so many millions of years to have, and the current reality of abundance that we don't inhabit skillfully because we have so much capitulation to the wiring that tells us we live in scarcity. Right? So in order to close that gap, we need to learn new ways of thinking and being. We need to intervene on purpose with our prefrontal cortex, our skills of imagination, that is to say, imagining things differently than they are. That's how inventions happen. That's how change gets made. You imagine a scenario, you imagine a solution, you imagine something that's not here yet. That's how human beings grow, right? Our imagination is the number one key to evolution, because in order to go from here to the future where we aren't yet, we have to imagine getting there, right? You can't do anything until you imagine it, right? So if we aren't able to experience and tolerate the really uncomfortable feelings that accompany growth, we aren't going to be able to evolve on purpose, and we're going to tread water, circle, 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 and do the stuff that we're doing right now. Killing the climate, killing the planet, killing each other, creating mass epidemics of addiction that we see in things like our mass epidemic of obesity in this country to food addiction. Right? So, understanding addiction is key to learning how we can evolve on purpose. That is to say, learning about addiction and learning what causes addiction and learning how we can truly recover and heal from addiction teaches us individually, collectively, globally, culturally, how to become self-aware, how to cultivate the skills of feeling feelings that at one point in our lives felt too unbearable to feel. Learning the skills to do that so that we can literally rewire the desire for the thing we're addicted to. This is what Gabor Maté is going to teach us. This is what Tara Brach teaches us. Because when we can cultivate and build our muscle to really feel any feeling there is and know that a feeling is a feeling, and if we feel it, it will pass, we become fearless. We become bold and courageous, and we can do anything because we're willing to feel anything, right? So, for this week's reading, I'm going to have you guys answer a series of questions. Those will be posted in the forum. So I'd like you to head over there after this video and make sure you print out those questions and start to take notes on those and write in your journals about those so that you have some well-formed thoughts to think about for Tuesday, and then for Thursday if you'd like to hop onto that call as well. But some things I'd really like you to think about that I don't have written down on that forum list are your own patterns of behavior. Usually when we think of addiction or the addict, we think of substance abuse. We think of the alcoholic, we think of the drug addict. But we have, all of us, I will bet every single one of you watching this video right now has an addictive behavior. Are you addicted to your smartphones? Are you addicted to social media? Are you addicted to Snapchat? Are you addicted to TikTok? Are you addicted to, I'm sure you're not addicted to email. That's just I'm not even addicted to email. Are you addicted to shopping? Are you addicted to eating? Are you addicted to sugar? Most Americans are literally addicted to sugar. The chemical response in our brains to refined cane sugar is exactly, if you just map it out and you just look at the brain chemistry that's happening, it's exactly the same response as we have to cocaine. And it's the same crash as well. Are you addicted to sex? Are you addicted to toxic or abusive relationships? Lots of people are. I was actually at one point in my life. And that's very common, actually. There's a thing called trauma bonding where you actually become weirdly neurologically addicted to the very source of your trauma, the very source of your abuse. That's why people don't leave abusive relationships, and other people are like, what the heck is wrong with you? Right? And it's not a choice. That's another question I wanted you to think about. Do you think addiction is a choice? Just snap out of it. Wake up. Why are you making a choice that hurts so many people? Hurts you, hurts your family, hurts all of us over and over again. I know that many of you watching this video and in this class are dealing with addiction in your lives, either your own or the addiction of a loved one. Maybe you have a parent who's an alcoholic or a drug addict, or you did, or you have a relative who is. If you don't now, you will be touched by addiction in some point in your life. So understanding this stuff is really, really core. One of the things I love about Gabor Maté, and the reason I assigned you this writing, is because the last bit of writing of his that I'm going to ask you to watch this week, or read this week and then talk about, is Gabor Maté's analysis and critique of the war on drugs. That is to say, how we in America have historically, for the past several decades, approached addiction, treated the addict, and the effects of that process and those choices and those systems. Needless to say, the war on drug has not worked. We're going to learn a lot more about that in the coming weeks. But Gabor Maté offers some really interesting insight into why that is. So this should be a very rich discussion. This week's reading is more than any other. Well, is that right? It's about, I think it's a little more than any other week you're going to have left the rest of the semester, but it's some of the most important reading, and I hope you find it as interesting as I do. And maybe you will find it really personally relevant for you as well, because your life has in some way been touched by addiction. But I'd really like you to, again, broaden your definition of addiction to include your own habitual addictive patterning, and how that might itself be a buffer for you against feelings you don't want to feel. Maybe you feel bored. Maybe you have a deep down restlessness that makes it really hard for you to sit still. Maybe you feel depressed. Maybe you feel anxious. Maybe you feel insecure. Maybe you feel lonely or alone. Maybe you don't feel like you belong. We tend to often deal with those feelings by eating them with food, drinking them away with drink, or buffering them with other kinds of activities that can all become addictions, or at least addictive patterning. And that's what we call buffering. They are forms of behavior that distract us momentarily from a feeling we're trying to avoid. And the reason that it's a great idea to learn not to buffer is because when we do, we first of all, we eliminate the negative consequences of the addiction. The definition of addiction, remember, is when we have basically the costs outweigh the rewards, right? So there are negative consequences to the behavior that we're using to soothe ourselves in some way. And despite seeing those negative consequences, we just keep doing it anyway, right? So when we learn to feel the feelings that we're trying to avoid when we buffer or when we participate in the addictive behavior, we liberate ourselves. We free and we liberate ourselves from the negative consequences of the addiction. The number one thing that keeps addicts addicted is shame. Right? It perpetuates the whole cycle, because usually when you're traumatized or you're just dealing with feelings that don't feel good, it's you're feeling some sort of inadequacy in yourself, some sort of inadequacy. And then when you shame yourself and punish yourself and beat up yourself, and society or people you love or people close to you beat you up or shame you for that behavior, all it does is amplify the feelings that you're seeking to soothe yourself for in the first place. But that's what we do. That's how we as a culture tend to handle addiction and addicts. So Gabor Maté calls for a very different approach. So does Tara Brach. I'm really interested to know what your thoughts are and your feelings are. This should be a lively, rich discussion, and I'm really looking forward to your recordings, and I hope a bunch of you will jump onto the Zoom call on Thursday as well. All right, everybody, have a really good week. Happy Sunday night, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.